Grace Slick created one of the most unforgettable songs of the 1960s in little more than an hour. Yet, despite its lasting impact, she spent decades insisting it was never one of her finest achievements. Her voice echoed across massive concert venues, she performed before hundreds of thousands of people at Woodstock, and she even became part of an unbelievable story involving the White House. Then, at the height of her fame, she made a decision almost no one expected. She walked away from the music industry and never returned. For more than 3 decades, she chose a life far removed from the spotlight. Grace has always spoken about herself with remarkable honesty. She admits she can be sarcastic and cynical, but she has never considered herself an unhappy person. When asked why she retired, her answer was simple. She believed rock music belonged to the young, and she had no desire to become an aging performer trying to relive the past. Now, at 86 years old, she continues to speak with the same blunt honesty that has defined her entire life. Long before she became a symbol of the counterculture movement, Grace Barnett Wing was born on October 30, 1939, in Highland Park, Illinois. Her father, Ivan Wing, worked as an investment banker, while her mother, Virginia, had once pursued singing. The family later moved to Palo Alto, California, where Grace enjoyed what she often described as an almost picture-perfect American childhood. Looking back, she compared those early years to an episode of Leave It to Beaver Star. Life was comfortable, structured, and predictable. There was another surprising part of her background. Grace's family traced its ancestry back to passengers who had arrived on the Mayflower. It was an upbringing rooted in tradition, making her future transformation into one of rock music's boldest voices all the more unexpected. The contrast between her conservative family history and her later role in the psychedelic movement remained one of the most fascinating aspects of her story. After finishing school in California, Grace attended Finch College in New York. Years later, she dismissed the institution as little more than a finishing school for young women. She later continued her education at the University of Miami before stepping into what society considered the ideal life for a young woman during the 1950s. Grace found work as a fashion model for San Francisco's upscale I. Magnin department store. In 1961, she married Jerry Slick, whose family had long been close friends with her own. Looking back, she explained that marriage simply seemed like the expected path for well-raised women of that generation. It was not something she questioned at the time. For several years, Grace lived exactly as society expected. She modeled professionally, managed a household, and settled into married life in the Bay Area. From the outside, everything appeared successful and secure. Yet underneath that carefully planned existence, she felt increasingly trapped. The life she had been taught to pursue no longer felt satisfying. Although it offered comfort and stability, it lacked the excitement and freedom she quietly longed for. That growing sense of confinement led her toward a character she deeply admired, Alice from Alice in Wonderland Star. Grace often explained that she saw herself in Alice because both had grown up in worlds governed by strict expectations. Alice lived under the rules of Victorian England, while Grace had grown up in the equally restrictive culture of 1950s America. In both societies, women were expected to behave in carefully defined ways. Grace remembered how even ordinary things came with endless rules. Women had to dress correctly, wear the proper shoes, create the perfect home, and follow a carefully planned future. What fascinated her most about Alice was not simply that she escaped those rules, but that she never waited for anyone to save her. Alice stepped into the unknown on her own, driven by curiosity instead of fear. That independence became something Grace admired deeply and eventually adopted in her own life. Before long, that independent spirit carried her toward music. In 1965, Grace, her husband Jerry Slick, and Jerry's brother Darby formed a band called the Great Society. Around the same time, Grace attended a Jefferson Airplane performance. Watching the group on stage sparked an immediate realization. She believed she could do exactly what they were doing, and she suspected she could probably earn more money doing it. As events unfolded, she proved herself right. During the final months of 1965 and the beginning of 1966, the Great Society recorded 2 songs that would shape Grace Slick's future forever. One was ***Somebody to Love***, written by Darby Slick. The other was a song Grace reportedly composed in roughly an hour while sitting at an old red upright piano with several broken keys. That song became ******** White Rabbit *******. The power of ****** White Rabbit ***** came from its unusual structure. Instead of following the typical pattern of popular songs, it slowly built momentum from beginning to end, creating a steady feeling of tension that never faded. Drawing inspiration from the dramatic rhythm of Spanish-style marches, the song gradually climbed toward its unforgettable closing line, encouraging listeners to feed your head. Grace used ****Alice in Wonderland** as the perfect framework for her lyrics. Familiar images from the classic story, such as Eat Me, Drink Me, and the mysterious pills that changed Alice's size, became symbols for the psychedelic experience. She often pointed out that Lewis Carroll's story had always contained dreamlike imagery that many readers overlooked, especially parents who had spent generations reading the book aloud to children. To Grace, however, the song carried a message beyond references to psychedelic culture. She believed the generation that had lived through World War II filled children's imaginations with stories of fantasy, magic, and impossible adventures. Then, when those same children grew up and searched for new experiences of their own, society reacted with shock and disapproval. In her mind, ****White Rabbit **** simply reflected that contradiction. Despite becoming one of the defining songs of an entire generation, Grace always described its creation in surprisingly ordinary terms. She wrote it on an old upright piano that cost only about $80, even though nearly 10 keys no longer worked properly. While composing it, she listened repeatedly to Miles Davis's * sketches of Spain * and Maurice Ravel's * Bolero *, borrowing their slow, hypnotic sense of progression. Unlike most hit songs, ***White Rabbit *** has no chorus and almost no moment of release. Instead, it rises steadily from its opening note until the final lyric, never breaking its momentum. In less than 3 minutes, Grace Slick created a song that captured the spirit of an era, inspired endless debate, and became one of the most recognizable recordings in rock history, even if she herself never believed it was truly finished. In 1966, Grace Slick took the biggest step of her young career. She left the Great Society and accepted an invitation to join Jefferson Airplane, replacing singer Sina Tilly Anderson, who had chosen to leave the group after becoming pregnant. Grace did not arrive as an unknown vocalist. She brought 2 songs that would soon change everything. ****, Somebody to Love ****, and ****, White Rabbit ****. The following year became the defining moment of her career. In 1967, Jefferson Airplane released ****, Surrealistic Pillow ****, an album that quickly became one of the most influential records of the Summer of Love. Both ****, Somebody to Love ****, and ****, White Rabbit ****, climbed into the top 10, turning the band into one of the biggest names in rock music. At just 27 years old, Grace Slick became one of America's first female rock superstars. Her deep, commanding voice and fearless stage presence made her impossible to ignore. She stood on stage with complete confidence, breaking barriers in a music industry that had rarely seen a woman perform with such authority. Those who knew Grace often spoke about her extraordinary influence. Her former bandmate and longtime partner, Paul Kantner, once joked that her impact on music and culture could be compared to that of Oscar Wilde. Yet Grace herself refused to treat ****, White Rabbit ****, as a masterpiece. While fans praised it as one of the greatest rock songs ever written, she spent decades insisting it was unfinished. She believed the lyrics could have been stronger and felt the song never fully communicated what she had wanted to express. Even after it became a timeless classic, her opinion never changed. Success and admiration did nothing to alter her own judgment. Grace found herself at the center of one of the most dramatic periods in modern American history. She was not simply watching the Cultural Revolution unfold, she was helping shape it. In August 1969, Jefferson Airplane performed at Woodstock, the legendary music festival that came to define an entire generation. After waiting for hours behind other performers, the band finally walked onto the stage as daylight began to break. Facing an audience that had spent the night exhausted, muddy, and sleepless, Grace welcomed them with a memorable greeting. She announced that they were about to experience maximum morning maniac music. The performance became one of the festival's defining moments and secured Jefferson Airplane's place in rock history. Only a few months later, however, the atmosphere surrounding the music scene changed completely. In December 1969, Jefferson Airplane appeared at the Altamont Free Concert, an event many hoped would become another Woodstock. Instead, it turned into one of the darkest days in rock history. Members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had been hired to provide security, reportedly receiving beer as payment. Before long, violence spread through the crowd. The situation reached a shocking point when guitarist Marty Berlin was punched unconscious on stage by one of the bikers. The attack happened in full view of thousands of concertgoers. Throughout the chaos, Grace remained at the microphone, repeatedly urging the audience to stay calm and cool down. Her words could not stop the violence. Later that day, during the Rolling Stones performance, 18-year-old Meredith Hunter was stabbed to death near the stage. For countless people, Altamont became the moment when the optimism of the 1960s finally came to an end. Grace experienced both Woodstock and Altamont from the stage itself, giving her a perspective few others ever had. She witnessed the idealism, excitement, and hope of one event, then watched fear, violence, and tragedy consume the other. Because she lived through both moments firsthand, she never viewed the 1960s through a nostalgic lens. While others remembered only peace and love, Grace also remembered the darker reality hidden beneath the surface. One of the most unbelievable stories connected to Grace Slick did not happen on a concert stage at all. It involved the White House. In 1969, she received an invitation to attend a tea party hosted by Tricia Nixon, daughter of President Richard Nixon. The invitation came because both women had attended Finch College, and the gathering was organized as a reunion for former students. Grace decided she would attend, but she had no intention of simply drinking tea. According to her own account, she planned to bring activist Abby Hoffman as her guest and secretly give President Nixon LSD. She claimed she had hidden roughly 600 micrograms of powdered acid beneath one of her carefully shaped fingernails. Her plan was to discreetly flick the powder into Nixon's tea while greeting him. The idea never had a chance to unfold. Before Grace and Hoffman could enter the White House grounds, security officers recognized them and refused them entry. Grace later believed she had already been placed on a government watch list because of her political views and public image. Hoffman's reputation as one of America's best-known anti-establishment activists only made matters worse. Some versions of the story even suggested his clothing alone would have attracted immediate attention. What continues to fascinate people is that Grace never denied or softened the story. She openly admitted that the plan had been real and spoke about it many times without trying to make herself appear more reasonable. She even laughed while describing how her long fingernails had been prepared specifically to hide the powdered LSD until the right moment. Although she acknowledged she could never know whether the plan would have succeeded, she insisted that her intentions had been genuine. The episode perfectly reflected the fearless attitude that defined Grace Slick throughout the 1960s. Whether performing before hundreds of thousands of people, challenging authority through her music, or contemplating an act that sounded almost impossible to believe, she consistently refused to follow expectations. Her life during those years became a series of extraordinary moments that blurred the line between history and legend.